Hey everybody, we are back with another tier list. This time we are going to be doing the amazing English rock group Swervedriver. This is a group that I only discovered fairly recently, probably within the past year, but immediately when I first heard them, I thought their sound was really intriguing and totally unique, and it really caught my ear. So I started diving deeper into their albums, and I really loved what I was hearing, and I got pretty obsessed with their work. One of the things that I really love about Swervedriver's sound is that to me, it's this great amalgamation of a lot of different styles that blend together really well. They're typically defined as a shoegaze band, but to me there's so much more to their sound that's beyond that shoegaze foundation. You know, they have a lot of moments that sound like early 90s grunge. They have some psychedelic rock moments. They have stuff that's influenced more by late 80s alternative rock groups like Dinosaur Jr. and the Pixies. And I think they do a really great job of dipping into each of these styles without ever really losing that foundational element at the core of their sound. In addition to that, another thing that really appealed to me was their very unique guitar work. Adam and Jimmy are really this magical hidden gem of a guitar duo. I love their experimentation with alternate tunings and how they're able to utilize all sorts of colorful chord voicings and unorthodox chord progressions, and I love the way that their guitar parts overlap on top of each other in such a unique way. Adam Franklin's beautiful voice and his great sense of melody combined with these amazing guitar parts fuse together and create these magical musical moments of euphoric bliss. So I can't recommend this band enough if you've never heard of them. I'm amazed that I had just discovered them like within this past year. One of my favorite bands that I have discovered recently. So what I'm going to do is go through all 6 of their studio albums from Raise up to Future Ruins. And I'm going to score each of them on this tier list with S being the highest and D being the lowest. Swervedriver has a pretty diverse fan group with a lot of differing opinions, so I'm sure there will be plenty of disagreement with some of my scorings, but I'm sure there will be plenty of agreement as well, so please let me know your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear from you and hear what you think, and if I get any information wrong throughout this, please let me know and I will correct it. And that is about it. Let's jump right into it. Okay, we're going to start out with their debut studio album from 1991 on Creation Records titled Raise, and I'm going to be cliche on this one, give it an S. Absolutely incredible album. One of the strongest debut albums I think I've ever heard. Of all of their albums, I would say that this one definitely has the most shoegazy sound to it, especially in terms of the production. But I would also say that it's heavier and darker than a lot of the other shoegaze groups from that year, such as Slow Dive, Chapter House, and My Bloody Valentine. It opens up really hard with the track Sci Flyer, a great way to bring the album in. It starts with about 90 seconds of the band going really hard and establishing a groove, and then the vocals enter and everything gets going really nicely. One thing I will say is that I love every song on this album, but if I had to rank them, I think this track might be at the bottom for me. And don't get me wrong, I think it's a great track, but I think from track 2 onward, I think the album really kicks into high gear. After that, we have Pile Up. I absolutely love this track, and I really love the change in the mood between the intro and the verse when the vocals enter. Really great contrast. The drum groove is also super cool over the verse, and it has really amazing guitar work. They're both just masters at being able to get so many different unique sounds out of the guitar. After that, we have the classic track Son of Mustang Ford, which had already been released on their debut EP, so this was a fan favorite that came back. This song is so awesome, and it's a great example of their amazing ability to have single note guitar lines happening against the vocal parts, and I feel like that's a very hard thing to do in a clear and concise way, and I think they are very effective at it in their songwriting. But yeah, I love this song. This would definitely be one of my favorites on here. And after that, we have a really nice change of pace with Deep Seat. This song has a really nice drive to it, but it's a little bit more mellow than the first 3 tracks, and I think this was the perfect spot to put it in. It has a great build to it as well. It really makes the vocals very effective when they enter. Such a beautiful vocal melody on Adam's part, too. The song basically follows one chord progression the whole time, and the way the guitars are able to develop so many different interesting parts around that main progression is really amazing. After that, we have one of their hit songs, Rave Down, which was another one that had already been released on their second EP. Beautiful track, amazing guitar chords, and another one that just develops and builds so beautifully. I really like the double time groove it goes into halfway through, really showcases the amazing technique of the drummer, and they bring it back to that original feel just beautifully. After that, we have Sunset. And this one probably has my favorite drum grooves on the whole album. The drummer is really going in, and it's a really great showcase for the entire band. You know, Adam has some really great vocal work. There's a lot of really great bass lines going on, and that instrumental section in the middle is very cool. It goes in some really interesting directions. After that, we have Feel So Real, and for a while, this was my favorite track on the album, but it might be a tie now between that and Son of Mustang Ford. Kind of depends on what mood I'm in, but I really love Adam's vocal work on this one, and those single note lines at the beginning of the song sound so much like a keyboard to me. It's, once again, just amazing the amount of sounds that they're able to get out of the guitar. I also really love the drum sounds on this one too. I think that snare drum has such a great pop on this track, and the ride cymbal, it sounds really nice and crisp. After that, we have Sand Blasted, another track that had already been previously released on their third EP. I really love the drastic change that happens after the intro of this song. I always appreciate a nice deceptive section to a song where they open it up a certain way and then it just completely changes and goes into a different direction. And I think this song is a great example of that. I would say that this is the most upbeat track on the album, at least in the main vocal section. The instrumental part does take some different turns, but I think having a song like this as the second to last track, it was a good choice, and it sets up the end of the album very nicely. The album concludes on a 5-minute track called Lead Me Where You Dare. This is a cool song. It has a really nice, chill, sort of repetitive vibe for the first 3 minutes, and then it goes into these trippy reversed parts that sound really cool, and they gradually fade out. And I like this song, but it would actually probably be my second least favorite song on here after the opener. Not a bad song by any means, but to me, this song has always sort of felt like a mellow track that's meant to bring the listener down after so much hard-hitting and intense music. So, it's weird for me because the first and last track are the ones that I actually like least on here, and then the 7 in between I think are absolutely perfect. But like I said, I don't think there's a bad track on this album. I still enjoy the opener and closer, but if I had to choose and I had to narrow down my 2 least favorite, it would be those 2. But still great songs, and I think this is an absolutely mind-blowing debut album. This one easily gets an S. Okay, next we have their second studio album on Creation Records from 1993 titled Mezcal Head. I always thought it was pronounced Mezcal Head, but then I heard an interview with Adam and he pronounced it as Mezcal, so I'm going to go with that. This one easily gets an S. Absolutely mind-blowing album. And this was the first album that I ever heard from Swervedriver, as is the case with a lot of people. I had no idea what to expect, but I thought the cover looked really cool. I thought their name sounded cool, so I had high hopes, but had no idea what to expect. So I put it on and I listened to track 1, For Seeking Heat, and when the guitar and drum groove came in, I was definitely intrigued. And then when Adam's vocals entered, I was completely sold. They had my complete undivided attention, and I was loving every minute of it. Such an epic, hard-hitting song to open the album with, and a really great track to showcase all of the great elements of the band. It's got these great drum grooves that are very cool and complex rhythmically. The 2 different guitar parts together sound so magical, and Adam's vocals really hit hard. And I love how the last section chills out a bit, and it brings the energy down a bit for the ending of the track. Production-wise, I find that this album has a lot more of a polished and crisp sound compared to Ray's. And this is the first album to have some production by Alan Moulder, so I'm sure that has something to do with it. But even though I find the production to be different compared to the first release, I don't necessarily think it's for better or worse. I actually really like the contrast in the production, and I think it's part of what makes each album so unique with Swervedriver. After the opener, we have track 2, titled Duel. This one is so beautiful, and a great example of how Adam's voice and the guitar parts just fuse together into these amazing, euphoric musical sections. I really love how his vocal melody blends into the guitar parts in the verse. And I love the contrast and the mood between the first and second section, and how it goes from a darker mood into a more upbeat, positive sort of sound, and how they're able to connect those 2 different sounds together into one coherent song. Amazing follow-up to the opening track. After that, we have Blowin' Cool, which is my favorite track on this album and definitely makes my top 5 favorite Swervedriver songs. I love this song so much. The drum and bass grooves hit so hard. Adam's vocal melodies are super catchy and melodic, and I love the way they build into the chorus. Whenever that chorus hits, it just feels so satisfying. I really can't get enough of this song. And then we have probably my least favorite song on the album, MM Abduction. Not a bad song, but to me, this has kind of always been the track that stands out the least, especially considering the three bangers that the album opened up with. And then after that, we have Last Train to Satansville. This track is on the longer side, but it's got this really great driving energy to it that keeps it going. I love the guitar work. There's a lot of great counter melodies to Adam's vocal parts within the guitar, and they develop more and more throughout the song. And I think a song like this is a great middle point to the album. I really like the placement of this track. Then the album continues with Harry and Maggie, Dragging It Under. This song is fascinating. I have two songs on this album that have my favorite guitar parts and chord progressions, and this is one of them. Really beautiful chord progressions, and it's amazing to listen to with headphones and hear the two different guitar parts and how they blend so beautifully. Awesome vocal melody on Adam's part as well. After that, we have A Change Is Gonna Come. This track is a nice change of pace. It's more chill and the mood is a little bit brighter. I really like the guitar work. It's got those really cool notes that are feeding back. And we also have a guitar solo from Adam as well, which is great to hear. And I really love the turn that this song takes for the last minute. It keeps that same vocal melody, but it changes the chords underneath it, and it gives it a slightly heavier and darker mood, which is really fascinating. Then we continue with Girl on a Motorbike. This song is so amazing. Probably my second favorite track on the album, and this is my other favorite guitar track as well. The chords are so rich and pretty, and they have this washy, reverby sound with a little vibrato on them as well, I believe. I could be wrong about that. And I love how they build the verse into the chorus, and when the chorus hits, it just feels so good with that heavy groove and that cool, fast single note line going on behind the vocal harmonies, similar to what we talked about with Son of Mustang Ford, those single note lines happening under the vocal melody. I just can't say enough good things about this song. Such an amazing vibe. And then we have two more tracks that just wrap up the album perfectly. First, we have Do Res, which is this amazing 8-minute track that really takes its time and builds in the most beautiful and intense way. The guitar work is absolutely incredible. They utilize all sorts of different effects as the song continues to build, and it's got some of the coolest uses of the wah pedal that I've ever heard. And then when the full groove enters and Adam's vocals come in, it hits so hard, and to me, it's one of the peak moments of the entire album. Really beautiful lyrics, too. I'm not the type of person to pay a lot of attention to lyrics in songs. It's something that I need to be better about, but Adam's lyricism is really incredible. He's got such a great command of the language, and he is one of the few people where I actually do pay attention to the words, and I'll read through them, and I'll try to interpret what he's talking about, and just amazing stuff. And then after that, the album concludes with a really awesome feel-good track called You Find It Everywhere. I love this song so much. It's relatively simple and repetitive, mostly just verse-chorus repeated a bunch of times, but to me, the vocal melody is so pretty and catchy, and I love the drum groove, and this song just always makes me feel good for some reason. I absolutely love it as a closer to the album. Also, a little fun fact about this song is that they actually had never played this song live until 2017 when they were doing a little tour performing Raise and Mezcal Head in their entirety. So a really incredible album, and I have a hard time deciding if I like this or Raise more. For me, I think it's more of just a mood thing more than anything else. If I want a more shoegazy sort of vibe, I'll put on Raise, but if I want an album that hits a few more of those different genres that they were influenced by, I'll put on Mezcal Head. But both are just absolute masterpieces and an amazing two albums to start a band's discography with. So this one gets an easy S. Okay, next we have their third album from 1995 titled Ejector Seat Reservation. So since Mezcal Head and Raise were the first two albums that I heard, I had no idea what to expect, and I was definitely curious about whether or not they were going to be able to keep the momentum from the first two albums going. So I went in with very high expectations, and it's funny because initially I wasn't that crazy about this album, but the more I listened to it, the more and more it really started to grow on me, and now I would say that I'm a big fan of it. So I'm going to give this one an A. There were some issues behind the scenes with this album regarding the record label. This was originally supposed to be released by A&M, but after a variety of different incidents and disagreements, the record label decided that they couldn't release the album for another year and a half, which resulted in them getting out of their contract and releasing it under Creation Records. At that point, Creation was already in financial trouble, so they were only able to release it domestically, and then they dropped Swervedriver from their label a week later. and obviously this resulted in a much less successful album due to the lack of advertising and the fact that it wasn't able to be released in the United States, and this probably explains why this album isn't available on most streaming services, unfortunately. In terms of the music, I don't think that this album reaches the highs of the first two releases, but I still think it is a very solid piece of work with a lot of really great, interesting songs that expand the palette of sounds that they had been building off of from their first two albums. The opening track is much more different this time. It's this spacey, ambient 2-minute track, which functions more like an intro, and then we go into track 2, titled Bring Me the Head of the Fortune Teller. This one, I would say, has more of a grungy sort of vibe to it, and I don't think it's a bad track, but it might be my least favorite on the album in comparison to everything else on here, so I think that also may have been why I didn't like the album as much at first. I think I might have been turned off that this was like the first full-length track on the album. I don't think that was the best choice. But after that, we have a really amazing track called Other Jesus. This is another song that, for me, has a really blissful vibe to it, similar to the feelings that I get from You Find It Everywhere, just a very feel-good song. I love the vocal melody. I love how it is doubled an octave below. It adds this really nice fullness to the vocal part, and it goes great with the guitar chords. And this was actually the track that Swervedriver wanted to use as the single to the album, but the label chose Last Day on Earth instead. So there's one example of some of the conflict that had been going on between the group and the label at that time. After that, we have Son of Jaguar E, a much chiller song, and I don't mind the song on its own, but I'm not crazy about the placement of it on this album. I think I would have liked a more higher energy song after Other Jesus, because for me, that's when the momentum of the album was starting to build, and I find that when this track comes on after that, it sort of dies down a little bit more momentum-wise. But on its own, I don't think it's a bad song. I'm just not crazy about where it was placed. But then the momentum comes up significantly, in my opinion, with the track I Am Superman. Such an amazing song and so much interesting stuff going on. The drums have this awesome John Bonham, Keith Moon sort of groove between the toms and the cymbals. The chord changes in the guitars are amazing, and I love the distortion on the vocals. It really makes the vocals hit super hard. And this is a song that showcases all of the band members in such a great way, and in my opinion, one of the coolest songs on the album. Then we have a more mellow acoustic guitar track called Bubbling Up. This is probably my second least favorite track on here. Again, not a bad song, but it does the same thing to me that Son of Jaguar E does, where I think the momentum drops a little too much. Other Jesus and I Am Superman really get me going, and then they're both followed by these chill tracks that tend to bring the energy a little bit too down for me. But luckily, after this track, I think the rest of the album is absolutely perfect. I love the remainder of this. We have the title track, Ejector Seat Reservation, another really nice track with a great feel and a great drive to it. I really love the vocal harmonies, and I think that sort of driving, adventurous sounding nature of this track is the perfect setup for the final leg of the album. Then we continue with my second favorite track on here, How Does It Feel to Look Like Candy? Such a beautiful song, really amazing vocal melody. I love the contrast between the clean and distorted guitars. It creates this really profound intensity whenever the distorted guitar comes in. And I also love the driving bass line that's at the foundation of the verse and how it's mixed with those subtle single note guitar parts. Very beautiful. And then after that we have Last Day on Earth. Now this one is really nicely placed. It's slower paced than the previous song, but it's nice and long, and it gradually builds the intensity more and more throughout and continues to get more and more interesting. And it's got a great chorus too, very, very catchy. After that, we have my favorite song on the album titled The Birds. This would also probably make my top 5 Swervedriver songs. I just find it so beautiful, and it has some of my all-time favorite Adam Franklin vocal melodies. Such amazing chords. I love the single note guitar parts that happen underneath Adam's vocals. And technically this isn't the final track because there are 3 more unlisted tracks that come up, but I always consider this to be the last track of the album, even though it technically isn't. But the blissful mood of this song, to me, makes it the most perfect ending track. But like I said, then we have 3 hidden tracks. The first one is titled Plan 7 Star Satellite 10, a chill minute-long groove with some cool effects going on and a cool female vocal sample. And then track 12 is a silent track. And then the final track is called Flaming Heart. This one is sort of just like a 2-minute chill rock song. To me, there's really nothing special about it, but I don't mind it. I could have done without the 3 hidden tracks. To me, it doesn't really do much to enhance the album. And like I said, I always tend to consider the Birds to be the final track. And usually when I'm listening to the album, I just stop after the Birds. I don't tend to listen to the unlisted tracks very much. Let me know if you feel the same way. I'm curious as to how other people interpret this album. But yeah, I really do enjoy this album a lot, and it did get better and better the more I listened to it and grew on me over time. And although it does have a few moments and a few tracks that I do find underwhelming, the amazing moments far exceed the negative moments on here. And I think this album features some of their most unique and beautiful songs. So, great album. I'll give this one an A. Okay, now we have their 4th studio album from 1998 titled 99th Dream. And I'm going to give this one a B. This album is interesting because initially I really liked it, and then the more I listened to it, the more I actually started to get kind of bored of it, and I found a lot of the tracks to be underwhelming. So it was almost the opposite of my experience with Ejector Reservation, where with that one, I liked it more the more I listened to it, and this one I tend to like less every time I listen to it. And I've really tried with this album. I've listened to it a bunch of times, but for some reason it just doesn't resonate with me the way that the other 3 albums do. There is some interesting backstory to this album as well. In 1996, they signed a 3-album deal with a subsidiary of Geffen Records called DGC Records. And originally, the first album was just going to be an American release of Ejector Seat Reservation. But then A&M gave Geffen such an insane price for the rights to the songs that they ended up just scrapping the whole idea and started working on this album. And then after the completion of this album, they had 3.5 weeks before the release, and DGC went through this big downsize and they terminated their contract. So Swervedriver has not had good luck in these past few years with record labels, which is very unfortunate, but thankfully they were able to get it released through an independent New York record label called 0 Hour Records. Musically, there are a few things that I don't like on this album. From a production standpoint, it's definitely my least favorite produced album of theirs. It's much more stripped down, and they made the switch from recording with 48 tracks to 24, and I think that changed things a lot because to me, a big part of their sound is the amazing use of layers, especially within the guitars, and I think reducing that did result in a sound that was different and not as familiar to them. I also wasn't crazy about the utilization of the acoustic guitar, and in general, I think that this album has some of the least interesting guitar work between Adam and Jimmy. It definitely still has some great moments, but in comparison to the other 3 albums, I would say that the guitar work on here is definitely the least adventurous. In terms of the momentum of the album, it does have a few tracks here and there that I do like, but oftentimes they are sandwiched in between a couple of tracks that I'm not as crazy about. The first 3 tracks, 99th Dream, Up From the Sea, and She Weaves a Tender Trap, are all very solid. I wouldn't say that they're some of my favorite Swervedriver songs, but compared to some of the other tracks on here, I would say that the beginning part of the album is probably the strongest part, in my opinion. And then when we get to track 4, These Times, that's my favorite song on here by far. I think that that track has the most resemblance to Swervedriver from previous albums. It almost sounds like a more mellow version of a track that could have been on Raise. I also love the production on that song as well. I think it's the best produced song on the album. After the first 4 tracks, that's when the album has a lot of moments that lose some momentum for me. Electric 77 has always dragged a bit too much for me. Stellar Caprice isn't bad. It's got some interesting guitar stuff going on. And then Wrong Treats is another one that I find kind of boring. It never did too much for me for whatever reason. But after that, I do like You've Sealed My Fate. I think that's a really cool track and probably the highlight of the second half of the album for me. I think it's really catchy. It has a great, almost Spanish-sounding chord progression. But unfortunately, after that, the album wraps up on 3 tracks that I'm not crazy about, with In My Time, Expressway, and Behind the Scenes of the Sounds and the Times. Those songs really don't do much for me for whatever reason. I find them kind of boring. And of the 3 tracks, I would say that the final track would probably be my favorite. It's a 7-minute track, so it does have some interesting sections within it. But even within that, I do find a lot of the parts kind of drag in between the sections and just don't do much for me. So unfortunately, I would say that this album is my least favorite of what we have covered so far, but it does still have some solid tracks as well. But there's too many that I'm not crazy about on here to put it up in A tier, so I'm going to give this one a B. Okay, so after the release of 99th Dream, there would be very little Swervedriver activity between 1998 and 2008, with a couple of little exceptions here and there, but in 2008 they would start doing some reunion tours, but even from 2008 onward, they wouldn't perform a new track until 2012 when they went on Late Night with Jimmy Fallon and played Deep Wound. All of these different instances eventually culminated into them writing and recording a fifth album in 2015 titled I Wasn't Born to Lose You. This was their longest gap in between albums, with 99th Dream being 17 years prior to this one, so I had no idea what to expect, but was very curious to see what direction they were going to go in. And I gotta say, this album was a very pleasant surprise. Another one similar to Ejector Seat Reservation, where initially I couldn't tell how I really felt about it, but the more I listened to it, the more it really grew on me. So I'm gonna give this one an A. We open with a track titled Autodidact, and this track immediately caught my ear. I was into it right from the start, and I thought this was a perfect track to open with for this new album. It's got that Swervedriver sound for sure, but at the same time it sounds refreshing and new at the same time, which I thought was the perfect combination for a comeback album. I really love the chorus of this track. It's got such a beautiful vocal melody and great guitar parts, two things that I always look for in a Swervedriver track. So seeing that right from track 1 was very great and very promising. Then after that we have track 2 titled Last Rites, and this is another one that I absolutely love. I think it is the perfect follow-up track to Autodidact, and this one actually, believe it or not, might be in my top 5 favorite Swervedriver songs as well. I really can't get enough of this song. My two favorite things about it are the drum groove and the vocal melody. The vocal part basically takes this one melody and just effortlessly weaves it in and out of all of these different keys, and to me it has such an adventurous and catchy sound to it. I always get that vocal part stuck in my head. Incredible song. And then it's followed by For a Day Like Tomorrow, which is a cool song. I wouldn't say that it excites me as much as the first two tracks, but it does have some really pretty moments that I enjoy. The way I feel about this one is very similar to how I feel about MM Abduction on Mezcal Head. You know, how it's a good song, but it's surrounded by so many incredible tracks on the album that it almost makes it look less exciting in comparison, because the song following this is an absolutely incredible track called Setting Sun, which was also the first single from the album, which I think was another brilliant move on their part. Of all of the Swervedriver songs, I would say that this has one of the most amazingly bizarre guitar parts, specifically when you listen to the two different parts going on at the same time, and then you listen to the bass notes underneath the guitar parts. There's really a lot of amazing dissonance going on, but it's just amazing how they can write these guitar parts and then the vocal melodies just flow right over it with just a couple of different notes in the case of this song. Really mind-blowing song. After that, we get to the halfway point of the album with track 5 titled Ever So. Another amazing song. This one builds really nicely. It has beautiful harmonized vocal melodies, and it builds beautifully throughout the song with these amazing dynamics. To me, that single note guitar part that happens throughout the song is such a key distinctive part that just really helps drive the track through. So up to this point, I love everything we've been hearing on here. I think each track is different and unique in their own regard, but the music still contains all of the elements that I've grown to love about Swervedriver. After that, we have English Subtitles, another pretty song. I really love the guitar parts in this one, a lot of great chord progressions, and I love the contrast between the darkness of the first section and the brighter nature of the second section when the full band comes in. Then we have Red Queen Arms Race, which I would say is probably the most distinctly different track on the album, between the 6/8 feel and the unison guitar and bass part that sounds like it may have an octave pedal on it. Another song with great contrast between sections. It's got more of a punchy, hard-hitting opening section, and then it takes a more colorful turn for the second section. But up to this point, I will say that this is probably my least favorite track so far on the album. Not a bad track again, but in comparison to everything else that we've heard so far, this always seems to be where the album's momentum dips down a little bit for me. But after that, they bring it up again with a great track called Deep Wound. Beautiful vocal melody, great guitar parts, and another song that has a very interesting use of the single note guitar lines going on underneath the vocal melody, similar to what we talked about with some of those other previous tracks. Another thing that's cool with this song that I noticed is that if you listen to it with headphones, there's this subtle high-pitched noise in the background throughout it that almost sounds like a high-pitched like saw noise or something of that nature. Very subtle, but it adds a really nice touch to the track, and I didn't notice that until I listened with headphones. Then after that, we have my favorite song from the second half, titled Lone Star. This song is really wild, so many interesting mood shifts, some more spacey psychedelic sections, followed by some more driving sections, and some amazing guitar parts and very interesting chord progressions. Probably my favorite chord progressions on this album after Setting Sun. And I also really love that bendy whammy bar guitar figure in the ending section of the track and how they wrap it up by bringing back the opening section. Nice, epic second to last track for the album. And then the album concludes with track 10 titled I Wonder. This is an interesting choice for a closer. To me, it feels like a song that builds for almost 6 minutes, but then there's never this moment where it like climaxes. It's almost like this very subtle, gradual build that keeps building more and more until the track just finally ends. The drums are sticking to the toms and doing a lot more of that Keith Moon, John Bonham style of drumming that we had mentioned on I Am Superman. And I think maybe because the drums never enter in with a backbeat at any point, it creates that feeling of the song building up more and more without ever reaching a peak. And I find that fascinating, and I think it was a very cool way to wrap up the album. So for leaving off on 99th Dream and not making another album for 17 years, I think this was a fantastic return album, and it gives us an amazing batch of new Swervedriver songs, some of which, like I said, would make my top 5 Swervedriver songs, others would make my top 10. So very, very, very good album. I will give this one an A. Okay, and finally we have their most recent release, their 6th studio album from 2019 titled Future Ruins. I was very curious how this was going to compare to the previous album, and I have to say I think this was even an upgrade from the previous release. I debated even giving this one an S, but after thinking about it a lot, I think A is more fitting, but it was right on the cusp of getting an S. I hold the first 2 albums in such high regard, so it would take a lot to put another album up there with those 2, but this is my 3rd favorite Swervedriver album by far. So this album was fan-funded, and it is 10 tracks long, and they must have had a creative explosion since the 2015 album, because apparently they wrote 30 songs and only chose 10 for this album, which does give me some hope that we might have a 7th album on the horizon, but obviously I have no way of confirming that. But this album has so many amazing songs. We open up with Merry Winter, a very good opener. It's got a great momentum to it. The 2 guitar parts together sound so rich, and it's got some really adventurous section changes. I love the instrumental middle section with the guitar bends and how they're able to weave it back into the beginning section. A great opening track. And then we have The Lonely Crowd Fades in the Air. This song is so beautiful, and for me, the thing that really makes this song so good is the vocal melodies. Just so much great melody going on, and great harmonies in the vocal parts. And I like the contrast of this song from the opener, because this one is a little bit more mellow than the opening track, and I think that they work off of each other really well. After that, we have the title track, Future Ruins. Much more on the chill side as well, but I really enjoy this song. And once again, another great contrast in the mood between the first and second sections. It starts out brighter, and then it gets much darker. And I love the guitar parts. I love how in certain sections, the guitar part is actually anticipating Adam's vocal melody. Very interesting way of writing. And then after that, we have this mind-blowing song called The Ascending. I became obsessed with this track after I first heard it. I actually listened to it like on repeat for like a few days. I couldn't get enough of it. Probably would make my top 5 favorite Swervedriver songs. This song, it just has such a catchy and powerful vocal melody, and some of the most unique chord progressions that I've heard in any Swervedriver song, particularly in the second section when he says life is but a dream. If you listen to the guitar parts against the vocal melody, there are some really dissonant, haunting harmonies going on within that section, and I just love the way that that dark vocal part just floats right over that progression. After that, we have another incredible track called Drone Lover, a great contrast from The Ascending. This one is on the chiller side, and the mood is somewhat in between bright and euphoric. The chorus is so catchy. I love the way the drums drop out on beat one. It makes that section really pop. Another very catchy song that I listened to a bunch after first hearing it. So we're up to track 5 at this point, and I'm absolutely loving everything that I'm hearing. And then next we have track 6 called Spiked Flower. And this one is definitely my least favorite on the album. It's got more of like an alternative rock, pop punk sort of feel, which is definitely a contrast from everything else that we've heard so far. Not a bad track, but up to this point, this is definitely the low point of the album compared to the first 5 tracks, which I think are just all bangers. And after that, we have another pretty mellow track called Everybody's Going Somewhere and No One's Going Anywhere. Amazing song title. I enjoy this song. The keyboard sounds are really colorful. I love the effect on the vocals. The way the guitar and keys mix together is very tasteful, and I like the variety of the different grooves that happen throughout the songs within the drum parts. I will say that tracks 6 and 7 are the one part of this album where the momentum dies down a little bit for me, and that is probably the main reason why I didn't put it as S. Because after that, the final 3 tracks I absolutely love. Track 8 is titled Golden Remedy, and this song has such a good vibe. It's got a really cool, chill mood. The guitar parts are very cool, particularly in the chorus. Great use of major 7 chords a whole step apart. And this is a track that I think was placed perfectly to set up the final 2 tracks, because after that we have track 9 titled Good Times Are So Hard to Follow. Beautiful song, and I'm sure most of you know this already, but it is strangely similar to The Birds. The opening chord progression is almost the exact same, and then there are some subtle variations in the second progression. The vocal melody is also extremely similar to The Birds as well, and I don't mind it because The Birds is a great song, but it is like a funny observation when you see how similar they actually are. And also surprising to me that they chose this out of the 30 tracks that they wrote, because I'd imagine that they have to be aware of how similar these 2 tracks are. But, like I said, it doesn't bother me at all. I mean, I think it's really nice. And then after that, the album ends on a beautiful down-tempo ballad titled Radio Silent. This is such a nice conclusion to the album. It's got these amazing guitar parts with some vibrato on top of them that just float you across the song. To me, this is a perfect example of a 7-minute song that has a great momentum throughout and just builds beautifully. And all of these little subtle changes that they introduce really make a difference. And I also love Adam's low, breathy vocals on this track. It adds such a nice touch. So great ending to a great album. And like I said, to me, it's even an upgrade from I Wasn't Born to Lose You. And this would go down as my 3rd favorite Swervedriver album. So I'm going to give this one an A. Okay, we did it. We went through all 6. So let me know your thoughts on my assessments of each album. I'm sure some people will disagree, particularly maybe with 99th Dream, which is totally fine, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, what areas you agree and disagree with. And like I said, if I got any information wrong about anything, please let me know and I will correct it in the comments. I am very grateful to have stumbled upon this band this past year. They were like a hidden gem that I was never exposed to, and now I tell everyone about them because the world needs to know. Not enough people know about this band, which is why I'm making this video. So if you're a subscriber who has never heard of this band, please do yourself the favor of checking them out. I am willing to bet that you will not be disappointed. And yeah, that's about it. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on everything. And if you are interested, feel free to check out my other tier lists in the comments. I do one of these every couple months, so you stay tuned for another one. And thanks again for watching. I will see you at the next tier list. Take care.